On December 30th, 2023, Samoa Joe defeated MJF to become AEW World Champion. Unexpected as this may have been for many fans, this was not a first in Joe's career. From AEW to TNA and even the WWE if you count NXT, he's won world championships in almost every major North American promotion he has ever wrestled in. But this video isn't about Joe's AEW title reign. In fact, it's not about any of the reigns I just mentioned. No, this video is about arguably Joe's best reign to date. This video is about Samoa Joe's run as Ring of Honor World Champion. Samoa Joe debuts for Ring of Honor at the first annual Glory by Honor show as the Prophecy's hired assassin, with his first mission being to take out, or at least significantly injure, then ace of Ring of Honor, Low Ki. Despite coming up short, Joe has earned the respect of the audience and become a mainstay on ROH, quickly climbing the rankings, turning on the Prophecy, and within a year dethroning fellow Prophecy member Xavier to become the new Ring of Honor champion. Joe would prove to be a fighting champion, as he would defend his belt against a large and diverse cast of opponents, from top babyfaces like Paul London to Prophecy members like Dan Maff to eternal rival Homicide, but it would take him until Glory by Honor 2 for him to wrestle his former Prophecy leader Christopher Daniels. Besides having a year-long story building to it, this match explores one of the most canonically important story beats of Joe's title reign, his lack of stamina. It's his biggest weakness and part of the reason why he lost to Low Ki at the first Glory by Honor. From the moment the match starts, Joe nails a big boot and immediately gets a near fall. He dominates Daniels with big strikes, chops, and ole kicks. He gets most of the offense for the first half of the match, while Daniels struggles to maintain any kind of advantage. An obvious downside to nailing this many high impact moves so early on is how taxing it can be on the body. Commentary plays up how Daniels has the advantage when it comes to conditioning, speculating that the strategy might be to wait for Joe to tire himself out. After about 9 minutes, Daniels makes his comeback, nailing the exhausted Joe with all of his best offense, including the best moonsault ever, only for Joe to kick out. Daniels continues to execute moves that seem designed to tire Joe out, such as submissions that would force him to crawl to the ropes and a top rope Hurricane Rana. Daniels eventually manages to hit the Angel's wings and gets a near fall so close that the timekeeper mistakenly rings the bell. Joe wins with the Island Driver shortly after, but it feels like he just overcame his biggest challenge in a while. This match took place at Ring of Honor's At Our Best 2004 event. It was an event that took place around the same time as the Rob Feinstein scandal. With RF leaving ROH and the company drowning in controversy, this may have been the closest ROH ever came to shutting down, meaning the stakes were high and more than ever, they needed to put on a great show. Luckily for them, Joe vs Brisco is still celebrated as one of the greatest matches in ROH history to this day. This was not the first time those two shared a ring. In fact, their feud started all the way back at ROH beating the Odds 2003, when Jay Brisco won a fatal 4-way that also involved Chris Sabin and AJ Styles. Joe faced off with the Briscoes many times since, dominating them in singles action, but just falling short in tag team matches. This, however, is not a tag team match. In fact, no outside interference could save Jay this time. This is a steel cage match. Despite that, Jay Brisco really tried to use every advantage he could get his hands on. Mark Briscoe tried interfering multiple times only to get dealt with by AJ Styles. His manager Jim Cornette negotiated for escape rules too. Ultimately though, no single advantage could save Jay. He had to survive on his own, and he did just that. As expected, Samoa Joe annihilates Jay Brisco for most of this match, never letting Jay have too long of a comeback before driving him back down again. What may have been unexpected though is Jay Brisco's reaction to it. Sure, he may have tried to take shortcuts and get the help of Mark, but he also struggles through it, becoming more sympathetic with each blow Joe rains down on him. His selling is phenomenal, so much so that simple acts like trying to sneak through the crack at the corner of the cage goes from feeling like a cowardly attempt to escape to feeling like struggling through the pain because he has no other choice. Then of course, there's blood. Jay Brisco had what was perhaps the greatest blade job in wrestling history and gave us some of the most disgusting visuals ever. The blood drying up on his forehead, washing over his surroundings, leaking all over the floor and Joe. It's stunning. Joe too plays a huge part in making this match as iconic as it is. His brutal offense, unmatched aura, and his laser-focused attacks on Jay's cut makes Joe seem like a true monster, and elevates Jay by proxy. After all, if Jay was taking this beating against most other opponents, it would be a burial, but against Joe, it's a star-making performance. In the end, it takes Joe hitting a top rope muscle buster for him to put Jay down for good, but in doing so, he admits that Jay was worth his respect. Joe might have kept the championship, but Jay earned one of the very few moral victories in wrestling that actually felt like they meant something. Much like with Joe versus Jay Brisco, this wasn't the first time those two shared a ring, but unlike Jay, Bryan had already beat Joe in singles action before. To be more specific, he caught him off guard with a surprise roll-up, a strategy which seems to work frequently against Joe, as other wrestlers such as Colt Cabana also pinned him with surprise roll-ups in the past. It's definitely a strategy Bryan will use in this match, but it's far from the only one. Bryan is also aware of the strategy used by Christopher Daniels, exhausting Samoa Joe until he runs out of stamina and then unleashing hell on him. Bryan's also aware of various other weaknesses that Joe had, such as his hurt neck and leg, and he has built a plan to exploit all those weaknesses to wear down Joe enough for the 3 count. That's exactly how the match plays out for about half an hour. Bryan focuses on his strengths, such as mat work, to stay in control on the match. He often rolls up Joe to try and sneak a win or simply to frustrate him. He unleashes quick, focused strikes on his weakened limbs and then backs off until Joe gets angry and spends too much energy in his attempts to hurt Bryan. Bryan's game plan is so much more than just stealing other people's work though. He also learns from their mistakes. One of the flaws in Daniel's plan was the amount of damage he took early on. It's arguably the biggest reason why he didn't survive Joe. Punk had used similar tactics in his first match with Joe, but was perhaps too easygoing, leading to a 60-minute draw. Bryan's offense here strikes a good balance, being focused but cautious, taking as much time as he needs and not a second longer. It's a near perfect plan, one that only a mastermind like Bryan could come up with, and poses a huge threat to Joe. There's only one tiny issue that Bryan may have not considered. He's going up against Samoa goddamn Joe. Despite everything going well for around 30 minutes, it all came crashing down when Joe landed a knee to Bryan's midsection. Bryan never recovered. He started making mistakes, panicking, getting angry, abandoning his plans, and trying to outstrike Joe, only for Joe to put him in his place and keep the title. This match took place on a show named ROH Punk vs. Joe 2, which should tell you all you need to know about the anticipation for this one. It almost never happened, as originally Steve Corino was set to wrestle Joe here. Once again, Samoa Joe is up against a familiar opponent. In their first match together, Punk was not defeated by Joe. He used headlocks to wear Joe down, targeted Joe's leg, and even tried to tire Joe out. But in the end, the champion lasted 60 minutes. It was a fascinating match that Bryan learned a lot from, and likewise in this match, Punk would be the one learning from the Bryan match. Punk's strategy once again incorporates headlocks and flash pins. He targets the leg, and he tries to frustrate Joe, pretty much like Bryan. The one thing Punk has over Bryan here is his hometown crowd. Punk in Chicago might just be the most over wrestler of all time, which means for Joe, he must overcome a lot more than just CM Punk. He must overcome Chicago. And as we've seen with guys like John Cena or Jon Moxley, that is no easy task. This match is intense, both physically and mentally for Joe. His injuries have been piling up due to his champion schedule. The crowd hates his guts, and to add insult to injury, Punk targets the arm to give Joe even more weaknesses. And despite all that, not once does it feel like Joe is the underdog. It speaks volumes to the level of star power this man has, that even in such a dire situation, he always feels in control. And in the end, he survives CM Punk and Chicago, giving us yet another 60 minutes draw. Not enough can be said about the impact this match had on pro wrestling. It was the first North American match to be awarded 5 stars by Dave Meltzer in years, and whether or not you care about those ratings, the wrestlers cared back then. For many people, this match put ROH on the map, and 20 years later, we're still talking about it. While the second match was highly anticipated, this match had the feel of something like Joe vs Kobashi. There was a believable chance that CM Punk could dethrone Joe here, and while the crowd weren't as one-sided here as they were in the second match, it still had that special atmosphere. This match had no time limit, and as such, online speculation about how this match could go ran wild, with some fans even calling for a 3-hour match. Naturally, they didn't even go 40 minutes. Many things that have been set up throughout the series are paid off here. The roll-ups, the headlocks, Punk beating Joe in a strike exchange, which has been unheard of for a while now and definitely not expected from Punk of all people. There was also Steamboat saving Punk by pointing out to the ref how he's still conscious, which is both a callback to a Punk vs AJ Styles match that happened earlier in the year, and a nice full circle moment for Punk's face run. Both men are desperate and panicking. Both of them overcome obstacles that they couldn't overcome before, but they also lose trust in a lot of their best offense, and in the middle of this panic, Punk ends up busted open from a punt by Joe, and much like the knee to the midsection that caused Bryan in his match, there was no way to plan around that. Joe wins, but only after trying everything, and even stooping to lows he never would have otherwise. He puts his feet on the ropes during a surprise roll-up of his own, desperate to find any way to put Punk down. But it doesn't work. It takes suplex after suplex after suplex for Punk to finally go to sleep. Maybe the best match in Ring of Honor history. Intense, layered, emotional, violent. Everything you could possibly want from a wrestling match is here. And while it's not remembered as fondly as the second match, it might just be even better. The story of Samoa Joe's title reign has been one of trial and error. Wrestlers experimenting with new strategies and learning from old mistakes, finding new weaknesses and tightening old game plans. Challenger after challenger stepping up against Samoa Joe thinking they figured him out, only to be put in their place. At this point it feels like someone needs to try something new. This is where Austin Aries comes in. Nobody could have seen Aries' title win coming. Despite being a great wrestler and the leader of his own faction, he was still viewed as just a rookie at this point. Still, he pulled off upset wins earlier in the year, so it wasn't impossible. Commentary keeps driving home that Aries' strongest weapon is his explosiveness, his ability to land high speed, high impact moves, one after another in a relatively short time. And once you look at how this match is structured, it's obvious why they did that. Aries' entire strategy is built on him catching Joe off guard. This is best exemplified by the beginning of this match. Aries rushes Joe with a flurry of attacks and tries to keep it going for as long as possible. Of course, it's Samoa Joe, so that's easier said than done, and Aries ends up losing control quickly, but it reflects his overall attitude. He focuses on the gains and doesn't overthink the losses. There are a lot of callbacks here, but they aren't shallow. They have a place in the narrative as they reflect a cornered Austin Aries trying to pull off anything from the arsenals of the people who came before him. The finishing sequence feels earned and really makes Aries' title win feel like the right choice. And after the match, when Joe puts the belt around Aries' waist, it feels like the end of an era.